Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson, and this is my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
Pretty good, Jeff. I'm excited to be back on the air. We had a little summer break there, but I'm excited to get rolling on some of the topics here, especially this one. We've got setting expectations up front.
And that's an interesting topic. It's actually something that came up in one of our previous discussions. I can't remember the specific details, but I believe it was when we were talking with, was his name Brent from Renters Warehouse?
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about setting expectations up front. And that's when you're first meeting with a prospective tenant and really laying things out there so that they understand what to expect from you and what you're going to expect from them as a tenant. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, when I think about it too, and I'm thinking, in terms of screening, what we're dealing with every day here at RentPrep is it makes your decision-making process so much easier when you have very clear-cut expectations and you can say things like, okay, I'm not going to accept somebody who's got a bankruptcy within the past year, or if they have an active judgment, that's a concern. This is somebody who shows that they're not responsible to pay the bills or have to get sued in order to pay something. And so when you do find a record, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, this person doesn't meet my expectations, they didn't meet my qualifications, my screening criteria, so we're not even going to look any farther at this point for or consider this person any longer. So I think it makes the tenant selection process a lot easier, and I think for the tenants too, you're weeding out the ones that maybe if they knew that you were going to run a background check, they wouldn't even bother applying.
That's right. So, when you start talking about setting up expectations up front, and you're starting from the very beginning in terms of expecting, letting them know that you're going to be running a background check, you're really letting them know, first and foremost, you're running this as a business.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly. And you're laying out very specific guidelines and, letting them know under no unclear circumstance exactly what you're going to be looking for. And then as it continues into the relationship, and if you do end up renting to them, same thing applies. They have to know what the expectations are. You expect the rent to be paid on the first, not the second or the third. You expect the condition to be, in such an order every yearly inspection that you're going to do, or biannual inspection that you're going to do. So yeah, I think having those conversations up front, some landlords I think kind of shy away from them, just because you do get sort of into that territory of, well, these are my rules and here's how it's going to be. But you kind of have to. I mean, you have to let them know exactly what you're expecting, and it's going to avoid problems down the road, because once you've identified things that are off limits or things that are not okay, there's no gray area. They know exactly what you're what's acceptable and what's not.
Exactly. And a lot of this stuff can and should be set down in writing. And we've talked about a lot of the different things in the past in terms of what they can and can't do from a landscaping standpoint, gardening and things like that, or people who smoke. Even if you don't allow smoking inside, do you let them know that there is an area in the backyard that you wouldn't mind them smoking? There are just a lot of different things that you can and should set up in writing. But then there's some of the other things that might not be quite so clear cut, such as the way that you want them to contact you. Do you want them to send you a text, an email, a letter? How do you want them to contact you, whether it's an emergency or just a general maintenance item? There are a lot of different ways that you can be setting expectations up front. You need to think your way through as many of those as possible so that you can lay them out at the beginning, instead of thinking, oh, wow, this person is calling me every other day. And you didn't let them know, you didn't let your tenants know what you expect of them in the way that they contact you or the frequency in which they contact you.
Yeah, and you made a perfect point there, and really think things out. I think that is where a lot of, especially new landlords, sort of fall short. Is they wait for failure to change their business model and help them, guide them along. But like we talked about before with joining associations or mentors, obviously is another great way of sort of beating the curve. You're getting that information from someone else firsthand that's been there and done that. And it does allow you to sort of think different scenarios through and say, okay, well, what would I want to do if their toilet breaks in the middle of the night, or if they lock themselves out, and I'm on vacation? What do I do? So you're right. Have think taking the time to think those things through, setting very clear expectations is going to keep everybody happy, and obviously putting them in writing is a key element to that as well, and it's going to eliminate a lot of discrepancies or any future problems.
Yes. And even, I'm thinking this through from beginning to end. When it's time for somebody to move out, if they're going to give you notice and move out, you can even set some expectations there. Sure, your contract says 30-day notice, but what if they give you 60-day notice? It sure would make your life a lot easier to know that if you have this extra time, even though you're not going to force them out, you can come up with some kind of a deal. It's like, hey, if you give me 60 days notice, I'll give you $100 extra on your cleaning deposit. When all is said and done, I'll give you a little bit of a bonus just for giving me that extra time, and we'll work together on how this whole thing will work. And you can sit down and talk with them about it when they first move in.
Hmm. Yeah, and it definitely circles back to what we're always talking about, is treating your landlording business as a business. And really, nobody does this better than property management companies. At least the good property management companies. They're very clear on what the expectations are, what the rules are. A perfect example is we're training a new screener, and we came across this situation where um, the property management company wouldn't provide any recommendation on this specific tenant because the tenant had not given 30 days notice. And they said, and this was their answer to us, was, we're very clear when we initiate the lease that we will not give a recommendation unless we are provided a 30-day notice, which we haven't received, so we're not going to tell you anything, basically. And it puts the tenant then in a position where they have to. I mean, they're if they want a good recommendation or any recommendation at all, they've got to play by the rules. But again, they were very clear in making us know that that was an expectation that they had set up front, and the person had agreed to it, and so they were sticking to it. So I think sticking to it is also a big part of it. You have
Yes.
to have the ability to put your foot down and say, no, 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 wait a minute, we went over this. This is not what we talked about.
We've talked about that in terms of people making late rent payments. If you let them know these are the penalties for a late payment and this is the date on which it is late, if you let them slide once, then they're going to kind of expect that you're going to let them slide again and again. And then it moves beyond paying the rent, or it starts to get later and later. Instead of a day or two late, it's a week late or 2 weeks late. You suddenly start to put yourself into a bad situation. Whereas if you hold them to it from the very beginning and say, yes, it's this penalty and you will pay it, then it's really clear.
Right. Agreed.
Well, I think that pretty much takes care of setting expectations up front, and it really does go back to looking at everything that you do from the beginning to the end and trying to write it down and make sure that you create your own guidelines and then express that to your tenants or prospective tenants as much in writing as possible. But some of the stuff doesn't make as much sense to put in writing. Maybe just a little quick sheet of,
Yeah.
this is where you make your payments. These are the things I expect. If you need to contact me, this is the best way to contact me. And I think when a tenant receives that kind of information in writing, then they feel better about the relationship. They feel that it's a business relationship, not just renting from some guy who happens to have an extra house laying around.
Right. Exactly. And being, have the landlord being prepared with that information or with those items, per, you know, it gives that perception that they're handling it as a business. And I think that the tenants, like we've mentioned before, are a lot more willing to provide information and play by the rules in that sense, because they know very clearly who they're dealing with.
Exactly. Well, great, Stephen. Thank you very much. Look forward to talking to you again tomorrow evening.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.